Thank You Next was definitely not an album I was particularly looking forward to this year, but it's slowly become probably one of my favourite pop albums so far. Ariana Grande is arguably one of, if not maybe the biggest pop star on the planet right now, and her vocal ability, for me personally, has definitely never been in question. But what steered me away from genuinely liking a lot of her music was, I feel, the bland approach to some of the production choices and the somewhat generic songwriting as well. I can't deny that some of her older material, or some of her biggest songs like Side to Side, were genuinely fun, catchy pop songs, but they were kind of lost in just loads and loads of unnecessary filler songs all over her albums. I recall the song she made with Future, I can't remember the name, I think it was on Dangerous Woman. That is one of the most jarring pop songs I've heard in a long while. Now Sweetener, which dropped I think August, September last year, I feel that was definitely her best album up to that point. Although I wasn't personally crazy about it, it was definitely a new direction for Ariana Grande. I appreciated her willingness to experiment with different sounds, and I feel that was her point for emotional maturity coming through in a lot of her lyrics, especially with God Is a Woman. I feel that was the biggest indicator of what was to come on Thank You Next. Being able to mesh mature songwriting with impeccable vocal ability and an inventive approach to production is always going to be a great mix for great pop music. And I feel with Thank You Next, she has definitely been able to marry these elements together to create genuinely moving songs at times. Thank You Next was recorded in a very, very short time span. I think it was recorded in the last 2 or 3 months of 2018. And I feel this process definitely served the album very, very well. It was recorded in the midst of extreme difficulties that she was going through in her personal life. Most significantly, the unfortunate passing of her ex-lover, Mac Miller, and her split from her fiance, Pete Davidson. Now, I can only imagine that the songwriting process at these times served as a sort of coping mechanism. It provided a message of positivity in the face of emotional trauma, which I think is a sentiment that is particularly lacking in the somewhat ultra-hedonistic pop music landscape directed towards young girls. The opening track to Thank You Next, Imagine, describes this dreamlike, perfect relationship that Ariana wishes to have, but it's framed as a way as it's almost unattainable. And I'm not sure whether this is pessimistic or it's just Ariana being real. What I feel isn't up for much debate is the beauty in the song, especially as it reaches its climax. The strings start to swell as Ariana gets closer and closer to her whistle-like register, and it all comes together to form a particular moment of beauty on the album. The next track is Needy, and I think this is a personal favourite of mine because it manages to let Ariana address some of her own flaws without leaning into over-the-top melodrama, which I think is quite easy to do in pop music. On this song, Ariana recognises her own insecurities and her deep need to feel loved by someone. She sings, "Tell me how good it feels to be needed," and I feel she also does an extremely good job at addressing some of her anxiety without actually ever saying it explicitly. She sings, "Sorry if I'm up and down a lot, sorry that I think I'm not enough, and sorry if I say sorry way too much." I think that's a brilliantly succinct way of addressing and dealing with one's own insecurities and anxiety. Now, I definitely feel Ariana is definitely aware that the large majority of her fan base consists of young teenage girls who may ironically be anxious about talking about and being open about some of their insecurities and anxiety. I think it's pretty admirable that at her level of fame, she's still able to relate to her core audience on such a personal level. And of course, this is all coupled together with an impeccable vocal performance. The idea of standing strong and being positive in the face of adversity is definitely a theme that runs throughout the album. And I feel this culminates in the song Fake Smile. On this song she sings, and I won't say I'm feeling fine after what I've been through, I can't lie, for Fake Smile. Rather neatly, she's telling her audience that putting on a facade of happiness just to please others is quite an unhealthy approach to dealing with any issues that you might have. Being vulnerable and dealing with trauma head on it's not a weakness, it's a strength, and Ariana is addressing that directly in this line. Instead of bottling up emotions and trauma, as hard as it may be, the healthy thing is to face them head on. And as the saying goes, it's okay to not be okay. As previously mentioned, her core fan base is definitely young teenage girls, but this particular sentiment I feel is extremely important to young boys growing up as well, who are constantly taught that being vulnerable and showing your emotions is a sign of weakness when it's clearly not. Now, the song Ghosting is probably the saddest song on the album in my opinion. From what I've been able to interpret from the lyrics, it sounds like she's singing about or singing to a lover and apologizing to that lover for still having feelings or being in love with a past lover. Now, in the context of her well-documented personal life, I would assume these are references to Pete Davidson and Mac Miller, and the song holds a lot of gravity when you have to take into consideration the unfortunate passing of Mac Miller. She sings, "I know that it breaks your heart when I cry again over him." Now, I feel if this is a line about her struggling with the passing of a former lover and her current partner having to also suffer by proxy, then this is probably the most intimate and personal moment on the entire record. She also sings, "Though I wish he were here instead, don't want that living in your head. He just comes to visit me when I'm dreaming every now and then," which is insanely personal especially for someone of her position in the music industry, someone who's insanely famous. And not only is this the most personal and vulnerable moment on the album, I feel it's one of the most personal pop songs I've heard in years. Now, this is all backed by a haunting kind of watery instrumental that's completely percussionless, and it definitely serves her vocals very well. Now, the one song I don't feel I've been rushing to return to much is Bad Idea. It's definitely not a terrible song by any notion, but I feel it just falls back into some of the old habits of kind of generic production, and it doesn't have that raw emotion and vulnerability that drive a lot of the other songs on the album, and I feel that's why I personally haven't gravitated towards it. Her vocals are on point as usual, but her fusion on this track of R&B and trap aesthetics just don't go over well for me. The album ends on "Break up with your girlfriend, I'm bored." And on the face of it, when I first heard it, I thought this is just another pop song fueled by selfishness and jealousy and lust as well. And I assumed that the title track would have been a more natural way to end the album. However, when I thought about it more and when I placed it in the context of the album, I feel this is, I don't know, it's Ariana returning to some of the darker themes of the album and also exploring some sides she's explored before in previous albums. It's her dipping her toe back into her dangerous woman phase. It's definitely a fun track to end on, but when I first heard it, it definitely felt out of place, and I still kind of feel that it's a bit misplaced in the track list. Despite this, and despite a few flaws here and there, I feel with this album, Ariana Grande has definitely cemented herself as one of the most talented and emotionally vulnerable pop artists right now. I feel it's extremely refreshing to see someone of someone who's hit the ridiculous heights of fame that Ariana Grande has, to still be so down to earth and relatable in her music, at least, when it's probably quite easy to become even more far removed from reality when you have hit those extreme heights of wealth and fame. I can definitely say, for all of the right reasons, Thank You Next is the most surprising album to come out this year so far. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to let me know in the comments down below what album or artist you think I should talk about next. Make sure to like and subscribe and dong the bell, and I'll see you next time.